There is a dangerous mistake you can make when trying to understand someone. You can listen to everything they say and still know almost nothing about them. Because people don't always reveal themselves through their words. They reveal themselves through their priorities, through what they fear, through what they hide, through what they would choose, when two things they want cannot exist together. And here's the part most people never notice. You don't need to interrogate someone to discover these things. You don't need to manipulate them. You don't need to study every facial expression. Sometimes, you only need to ask one question, and listen carefully to what happens after it. Because the right question doesn't force someone to reveal themselves. It simply gives their own mind room to speak. And there are 5 questions that can take you from knowing someone's words to understanding the person behind them. But the 5th question is different, because it doesn't ask what they believe. It forces them to choose. And when someone has to choose between two things they genuinely value, the person they are becomes much harder to hide. So listen carefully, because once you understand these 5 questions, you may never have an ordinary conversation again. Question 1. What matters most to you right now? It sounds harmless, almost too simple, but don't underestimate it. Most people spend their lives talking about what they have, while very few people stop to examine what they actually value. So ask, what matters most to you right now? Then, don't interrupt. Don't rush to fill the silence. Let them answer. Maybe they'll say money, maybe family, maybe freedom, maybe success, maybe love, maybe peace. Maybe they simply want to become a better version of themselves. Whatever they say, don't judge it. Go one level deeper. Ask, why? That's where the real answer begins. Because the first answer is usually the socially acceptable answer. The explanation underneath it is often much more personal. Someone might say they want money, but perhaps what they really want is freedom. Someone might say they want success, but perhaps what they really want is recognition. Someone might say they want love, but perhaps what they really want is reassurance that they're worthy of being loved. The word isn't the revelation. The reason behind the word is, and this is where Stoicism gives us an important distinction. Your priorities shape your life. What you repeatedly give your time to, your attention to, your energy to, slowly becomes the architecture of your existence. So if you want to understand someone, don't only listen to what they say they value. Watch what they repeatedly prioritize. Because actions are often the quiet confession that words are trying to hide. But there's a problem. Knowing what someone wants doesn't tell you what they are afraid of. And sometimes, what a person fears losing reveals more than what they want to gain. Question 2. What would you never want to lose? Now the conversation changes. Because desire shows direction, but attachment shows vulnerability. Ask, what would you never want to lose? Then watch. Not just their answer, their reaction. Some people will answer immediately. Others will pause. That pause matters. Because sometimes the mind needs a moment to find the thing it is most afraid to admit it is attached to. Maybe it's their family. Maybe it's their reputation. Maybe it's financial security. Maybe it's independence. Maybe it's a relationship. Maybe it's their position in society. Now ask yourself, why? Why would losing that thing be so painful? Because what we fear losing often sits very close to our identity. A person terrified of losing status may have built their identity around being admired. A person terrified of rejection may have attached their worth to being accepted. A person terrified of losing control may feel unsafe whenever life becomes unpredictable. This doesn't mean you should diagnose them. And it certainly doesn't mean one answer gives you permission to label someone. People are more complicated than that. But patterns tell you something. And here's where the Stoics become uncomfortable with us. Because they repeatedly warned against placing our peace entirely in things we don't control. People can leave. Money can disappear. Reputation can change. Circumstances can turn overnight. And when your peace depends completely on something external, you've quietly handed that thing the keys to your mind. So this question isn't simply, what do you love? It's also asking, Where could life hurt you most? And that's a much deeper question. But we're not finished. Because now we know what someone fears losing. The next question reveals something they may be afraid to admit they want. But wait, there's something you need to understand. You should never confuse someone's public personality with their private desires. Person can look confident and secretly crave approval. They can look independent and secretly fear rejection. They can appear completely satisfied while quietly imagining another life. So if you really want to understand someone, you have to remove the audience. Question 3. What would you do if nobody could judge you? This question is powerful because judgment changes behavior. Think about how many decisions people make because of other people's opinions. The career they choose, the relationship they stay in, the dreams they abandon, the words they swallow, the risks they never take. So ask, what would you do if nobody could judge you? And then, be quiet. Don't save them from the silence. Let them think. Because silence after a good question can be more revealing than another 10 questions. Maybe they want to leave their job. Maybe they want to start something completely different. Maybe they want to tell someone how they really feel. Maybe they want to stop pretending. Maybe they want a life that looks nothing like the one they currently live. And suddenly, you are no longer hearing about their public life. You're hearing about the life that exists behind the fear of judgment. But here's the deeper truth. The answer isn't necessarily who they really are. It's a glimpse into who they believe they could be if judgment disappeared. And that distinction matters. Because sometimes the prison isn't built by other people. It's built by our anticipation of their reaction. We imagine the criticism before it happens. We imagine rejection before we've spoken. We imagine failure before we've begun. And eventually, we obey an audience that may not even exist. The Stoics understood this. They didn't teach people to become universally admired. They taught people to become internally governed. Marcus Aurelius understood that other people's opinions belong to them, not to him. And that's a lesson worth remembering. Because if someone else's judgment can determine every decision you make, they don't need to control your life directly. Your fear of their opinion will do it for them. But now we go deeper. Because wanting something secretly is one thing. The ability to question what you already believe is something else entirely. Question 4. What would make you change your mind? This question doesn't reveal what someone believes. It reveals their relationship with being wrong. Ask, what would make you change your mind? And listen carefully. Some people will immediately defend their position. Others will become uncomfortable. Some will say, nothing, and that answer tells you something. But imagine someone saying, if the evidence proved I was wrong, I would change my mind. That tells you something completely different. Because there is a difference between intelligence and intellectual humility. A person can be extremely intelligent and still be trapped inside their own certainty. They can know hundreds of facts and still refuse to question themselves. The Stoics were obsessed with examining their own judgments, not because they believed themselves stupid, but because they understood how easily the mind can mistake an impression for reality. You see something, you interpret it, then you react to your interpretation, and you forget that there was a difference between what happened and the story you created about what happened. Someone doesn't reply. You think, they don't respect me. Someone disagrees. You think, they're against me. Someone walks away. You think, they don't care. But what do you actually know? This is why the ability to change your mind is a form of strength, not weakness. Because saying, I may be wrong, requires more courage than pretending you cannot be wrong. And now, we've reached the final question, the question that changes everything. Because knowing what someone values and knowing what they fear is useful. Knowing what they secretly desire is useful. Knowing whether they can question themselves is useful. But none of these tells you what happens when their values collide. And that's where people reveal their hierarchy. Question 5. If you had to sacrifice one, which would you choose? This is the question. Not, what do you value? But what would you sacrifice? Because people can say they value everything. Freedom, money, love, peace, success, loyalty, security, adventure. But life doesn't always allow us to keep everything. Eventually, something has to be chosen. So ask, if you had to sacrifice one, which would you choose? Then give them two things: money or freedom, love or independence, success or peace, security or adventure, recognition or privacy. And don't focus only on their choice. Listen to the explanation, because the explanation reveals the hierarchy underneath the values. Someone who chooses freedom over money may be telling you something about how they see life. Someone who chooses security over adventure may reveal how strongly they value stability. Someone who chooses peace over recognition may have learned that external approval isn't worth internal chaos. Again, this isn't a psychological diagnosis. It is a window, a moment of observation. And here's why this question is so powerful. When everything is available, everyone can claim to value everything. But when two values collide, you are forced to reveal which one sits higher. And that is where the conversation becomes deeply human. Because we don't always discover our values when we have everything. Sometimes, we discover them when we have to choose what to lose. Now, you might be thinking, if I know these 5 questions, I can read anybody. No, and believing that would be the biggest mistake you could make. You cannot read someone's mind. You cannot know another human being with absolute certainty. And anyone who tells you otherwise is selling you an illusion. What you can do is become better at observing, better at listening, better at asking, better at noticing patterns, and most importantly, better at separating what you know from what you assume. That's real psychological intelligence. Because the moment you become convinced that you can completely decode people, you stop listening to them. You start fitting everything they do into the story you've already created. And now, you're no longer understanding them. You're studying your own assumptions. That's dangerous. A Stoic does something different. They observe without immediately concluding. They listen without immediately reacting. They question without needing to be right. And they remember, I don't control what another person thinks, but I control how carefully I interpret what I observe. And now we arrive at the part that has almost nothing to do with reading other people. It has to do with reading yourself. Because ask yourself honestly, why do you want to know what other people are thinking? Is it curiosity or fear? Do you want to understand them? Or do you want certainty? Do you want to know whether they like you? Whether they'll leave? Whether they're lying? Whether they respect you? Whether they secretly want something from you? Because sometimes, our obsession with reading other people's minds is really an attempt to escape uncertainty. And that is something Stoicism challenges directly. You don't need certainty about everything. You need control over your response to uncertainty. That's different. You can observe someone's behavior without inventing a conclusion. You can notice distance without immediately assuming rejection. You can hear criticism without allowing it to destroy your self-respect. You can ask questions without demanding answers that make you comfortable. That is emotional discipline. And perhaps the greatest lesson here is this. You don't become powerful when you can predict everyone. You become powerful when you remain steady even when you cannot. Think about that, because if your peace depends on knowing exactly what everyone thinks, you will never have peace. There will always be another unanswered message, another strange expression, another unexplained silence, another person whose motives you cannot fully understand. But when you learn to tolerate uncertainty, you stop needing to control every mystery, and that is freedom. So, can 5 questions let you literally read someone's mind? No, but they can do something more realistic, and perhaps more valuable. They can help you create conversations where people reveal their priorities naturally. The first question reveals what matters. The second reveals what they fear losing. The third reveals what judgment may be suppressing. The fourth reveals their relationship with truth. and the fifth reveals what they prioritize when life forces a choice. 5 questions. 5 windows. But the real secret isn't the questions. It's what you do after asking them. You listen. You wait. You observe. You don't rush. You don't try to force the answer you want. You allow the person to reveal themselves. And perhaps that's the difference between manipulation and wisdom. Manipulation asks, how can I use what I know about you? Wisdom asks, what can I understand without trying to control you? That distinction changes everything. So the next time you meet someone, don't try to become a mind reader. Become a better listener. Ask, what matters most to you right now? What would you never want to lose? What would you do if nobody could judge you? What would make you change your mind? And finally, what would you choose if you had to sacrifice one? Then listen, not just to their words, but to the values behind them. And while you're listening to someone else's answers, listen to your own mind too. Because the same questions can expose you. What matters most to you? What are you terrified of losing? What are you afraid people will think? What belief are you unwilling to question? And what would you sacrifice when 2 things you love can no longer coexist? Those answers may tell you more about yourself than any personality test ever could. Remember, observe without assuming, question without manipulating, listen without rushing, and never forget the Stoic principle at the center of all of this. You cannot control another person's mind, but you can control the mind you bring into every conversation. And that is where real power begins. If this video made you see human behavior differently, subscribe for more Stoicism, psychology, emotional intelligence, and self-mastery. And the next time you're sitting across from someone, remember this: you don't need to force people to reveal themselves. You don't need to chase their secrets. You don't need to decode every expression. Sometimes, you only need to ask a better question. Because the right question doesn't reveal someone's mind by force. It gives their mind a place to reveal itself. And now you know exactly where to begin.